All right, good morning. Been running all morning and just trying to take care of things and get things happening. Thursdays are always kind of a rush day for me because I have to, as soon as this is done, I hit the car and I'm out. I got to grab donuts for my guys, and I've got a safety meeting that I do at 7. So I got to be downtown for that and ready to go. So anyway, my life gets kind of crazy, but this is my Friday, so I'm excited about that. I'm going to just enjoy this day. Tomorrow, Lord willing, I'm going to play golf with my son and my baby son and enjoy that time. So life's good. Last night we had a great time. We had a group of folk over and walked through some what we call ULA life, just wanting to be better in 7 key areas. And so we had a little class last night where we kind of walked through that and so watch a video of the guys that are in charge of this thing, and they share, and then we kind of chart out some things and answer some questions and dialogue and strengths and weaknesses. It's just designed to help us kind of grow in the area of balance so that our life doesn't feel all tilted in one direction, and to grow in those areas where we feel like we're all right. Let's just don't stay plateaued. Let's move forward and walk into the purpose that God has for us. And so it's been fun. And last night was great and rich. Probably stayed up too late, and I'm up too early, but I'm ready to go. So let's jump into the text this morning. We're in 1 Corinthians 7, and we've been working our way through this concept of divorce. I don't have enough time to really review, and it's really unnecessary. All you got to do is go to my page and scroll down just a little bit. You'll see yesterday's and the day before that and the day before that. It's a pertinent topic that came up in Jesus' conversations while he was in Judea. The Pharisees trying to trap him. And so they asked him about divorce and remarriage. And so he answered that question. And then because Paul comes along and gets a little more specific, because it's a different age at this point, you've got, in Christ's day, you didn't have Christians, right? They weren't there until after the resurrection. You had Jewish followers who then believed that he was who he said he was. And so there is that. But now, 30 years later, Paul is dealing with Jews, Gentiles, people coming to Christ from all sorts of deals. They're marrying, and so there's questions that arise, and Paul is answering those questions. Yesterday, we began the journey of that. And so we looked at several things, and again, I don't want to get all into that, but we talked about divorce and remarriage. It is good to be married. If you're going to be married, hey, do it well, right? Enjoy that process. If you're unmarried, that is a divorced person, or you're a widow, then here's the situation there. And so we've been working our way through this issue. And so we're going to continue today. Paul's expanding. So what he said earlier was, now, not I, but the Lord says. Now, in verse 12, which is where we're going to be in 1 Corinthians 7, he says, but to the rest, I say, not the Lord. Now, so what does he mean by that? Well, he's like, hey, the Lord and I are disagreeing here. That's not what he's saying. He's saying the Lord didn't really comment on the unique situations of unbelievers or believers married to unbelievers and strife or whatever's in the mix of that. So he's shifting gears now to the next category. So he's spoken to those who are unmarried. He's then spoken to the unmarried and the widows, and he has also spoken to the married. Now he's going in to talk about these mixed marriages. I know that sounds like mixed in the sense of ethnicity or anything like that. God has no prohibitions in that realm. God has one prohibition: don't marry someone who's not a believer. That's the prohibition. He doesn't say color is not an issue, economics is not an issue. None of that's an issue for the kingdom of Christ. We're free to do that in any realm. Just want that out there in today's, just because of what's going on today in the area of race and all of that. God has one concern, that if you're a believer, you marry a believer. And so that's the bottom on that. Now, let's just jump into the text. Paul says, verse 12, but to the rest I say, not the Lord, that if any brother has an unbelieving wife, and she consents to live with him, you don't get to divorce her, right? So they're asking, okay, well, I've come to Christ, and now that I am I defiled? Should I divorce my unbelieving spouse and move on? Because see, those were the issues that you remember we had talked about in the Old Testament. There was a time when God commanded, "Hey, I want you to divorce all those pagan wives. I want you to go marry, go get remarried, or marry those of the faith." So this is now that question, and so they're saying, "Well, so are we to do that? What's the deal now? We don't know what to do because we've come to Christ and our mate hasn't. What do we do? Do we divorce him?" That was the question. Remember, he was answering a series of questions. This is one of those questions. But to the rest I say, not the Lord, that if any brother has an unbelieving wife and she consents to live with him, he must not divorce her. That's not a reason to divorce because your mate's an unbeliever. Not a reason to divorce. Just so you're clear. And if any woman has an unbelieving husband and he consents to live with her, she must not leave her husband either. So here you are, you're a man or a woman, you come to Christ, you go, woo, life's great, and then you look at your mate and go, wow, they're not following Christ. What do I do here? You stay in that relationship. And this is what he says. For the unbelieving husband is sanctified through his wife, and the unbelieving wife is sanctified through her believing husband. For otherwise your children are unclean, but now they are holy. So what's he saying here? Listen, it's a good thing that they stay with you. Why? Well, because the grace of God. Now Paul's addressing a spiritual issue. Listen, stay married to them. Let the light of Christ shine on them 24/7. They wake up and they're with a believer. They have dinner and they're with the believer. They lay down and they're with the believer. He said, listen, sometimes we think the opposite effect. We think, oh, they're going to defile us or they're going to drag us down. Well, now that's a great thought before you get married. But after you're married and this thing happens, no. What's happening now is you pursue Christ, and you're pursuing Christ. You will be a better spouse because you'll be doing the things that the Lord requires. You will lead your wife in a good and holy way. You will understand your wife. You'll seek to hear her needs as a new believer, even if they're not a believer. And for the wife, you're going to be submissive to that husband. You're going to be supportive of that husband. You're not going to be that nagging wife. And so all of those things are going to work into the favor, not necessarily of your marriage, although it will, because those are principles, but it will work in favor of your unbelieving mate. So quit thinking, oh, they're going to defile me. I need to get out of this. No. Think of it this way. I have a great opportunity to bring the grace of God to bear into this situation. Now, listen to what he says. They are sanctified through you. That doesn't mean that they're saved. They're not saved because they're unchristian and you're a Christian. They're sanctified. That means that they're set apart. That means that the grace of God that's coming on you, fills you, spills over, it affects them too. And this is what he's talking about. So they experience God's favor. They experience God's blessing by virtue of you. It's good for them to stay there. And it also keeps your children from being unclean. You leave that mate, your kids are drug into all sorts of undefiled things as a pagan. He or she is just going to go do their thing. So, we always talk about staying married for the kids is not a reason. Well, you should really think through that principle. That's a statement that we make to give ourselves permission to divorce a spouse that we just don't like. Paul is arguing, and the scriptures are arguing something different. You do need to consider your kids in the mix when you divorce. This is what he's saying. I'm not being hard to any of you. I'm glad I'm not looking at faces. I'm just speaking truth to the air in that sense and letting God put it in the hearts that he wants to. But that's a silly excuse to say I'm getting out, and because of I'm not going to just stay in a marriage because of my kids. So just for that. Now realize if you're in danger or your kids are in danger, then you ought to move out of that relationship. And I'm not saying get remarried. I'm saying you should get out of that situation if there's no resolve. But that's a different deal. So. Then he says this, though. He said, but listen, if they want to leave, verse 15, yet if the unbelieving one is leaving, if they're like, man, I'm out of here. This Christianity stuff is crazy. I'm gone. let them leave. The brother or sister is not under bondage in such cases, but God has called us to peace. Listen, if you're in a marriage and your mate wants to leave, your unbelieving mate is like, hey, I'm done here. I'm out of here. I'm gone. Paul says you're no longer under bondage, krozo. It means that they have, that person has eliminated themselves out of your life. If that's happening, if somebody eliminates you out of their life, if they initiate this divorce, now he's speaking of unbelievers, but I'm telling you that the principle is, if someone leaves you, then let them go. Don't try to fight that thing. Don't do all of that. Just let them go. Now listen to what he says. You're no longer under bondage in such cases. Now let me take you to Romans 7 really quick and just give you a verse. Jot it down or whatever, but here it is. Paul, in the context of believers united to Christ, says this: for the married woman, Romans 7, verse 2, for the married woman is bound. That's the word we look at over there in 1 Corinthians 7. Bound by law to her husband as long as he is alive. But if her husband dies, she is released from the law concerning the husband. So then, if while her husband is alive, she gives herself to another man, she'll be called an adulteress. But if her husband dies, she's free from the law, so that she is not an adulteress if she gives herself to another man. That same principle applies here. If your unbelieving mate leaves, that they have severed the bonds of the relationship. You didn't sever it, they severed it. And Paul says you're free. Now, in Romans, he says you're free to remarry. Well, it seems if that term is used bound, and I realize there's a lot of disagreement here. There are a lot of people who are going to go, nope, you don't have a right. You can't get remarried. You can't do any of that. And I'm seeing this, and the way I see it, you have to interpret it for your own life. Yet if your unbelieving one is leaving, let them leave. The brother or sister is not under bondage in such cases, but God has called us to peace. Don't go grabbing hold of their jacket and hold on to them and drag them, let them drag you out the door or pull themselves away from you. He says, listen, and don't turn this into some holy evangelistic thing. Well, I'm just going to stay in it for the Lord. I'm going to keep, trying to woo him back. If that's what the Lord's called you to, that's fine. But listen to what he says here in verse 16. For how do you know, wife, whether you will save your husband? Or how do you know, husband, whether you will save your wife? This isn't an evangelistic thing. Now, so here's what we've learned before we move further. Two things, right? One is divorce is permissible for adultery, and divorce is permissible when non-Christians leave. Now, you have to weigh whether that principle we talked about, bondage, means that if your spouse initiated a divorce, then you're free to remarry. So here's what you just have to solve that. I don't want to speak where the Lord hasn't, but I'm just telling you, there's a key word there that if the Lord allows, I think you're within the bounds, but you have to determine that with the Lord. I can't say that. Now, your coming to Christ doesn't change your place. This is the next question. We have to get to that to get to the end of this. So he's saying, hey, listen, he's still in that conversation about unbeliever, believer. Now he shifted gears from really the marriage thing to just talking about your lot in life. Only as the Lord has assigned to each one, as God has called each, in this way let him walk. And so I direct at the churches, was any man called when he was already circumcised? Well, then don't try to put the foreskin back on, right? Don't become uncircumcised. Were you called in the uncircumcision? You're like the Gentiles? Well, you're not obligated to be circumcised. Circumcision is nothing, uncircumcision is nothing, but what matters is the keeping the commandments. Each person is to remain in the state in which he was called, right? He said, listen, however you came to Christ, you're fine. Just stay that way. That's that whole beautiful thing about old things are passed away. Behold, all things have become new. Were you married 5 times before you came to Christ? Okay, listen. Where are you today? Are you married? Stay there. Are you single? You're good. Stay there. Doesn't mean you can't get married. He's just saying that's how you come into this thing. So your past is not your past. The woman at the well, when Jesus says, yes, You rightly said you have no husband, for you have had 5 husbands, and the one you're with now is not your husband. But when she came to Christ, all that's wiped away. You understand? So this is really gracious stuff that he's saying here. And so he's saying, hey, are you? Goes a little further down. He says, were you called as a slave? Well, don't let that concern you. But if you're also able to be free, take advantage of that. Hey, did you come as a slave? Great. Well, then don't start fighting and clawing and conniving and try to get your way out. But if you can get free, right? So he's not saying you're stuck where you are. He's simply saying, just now that you're where you are, follow the commands of the scriptures. For the one who has called you, he says, verse 22, in Lord as a slave is the Lord's free person. Likewise, the one who is called is free is Christ's slave. You were bought for a price. Do not become slaves of people. Brother and sisters, each one is to remain with God in the condition in which he was called. All right. So now that's dealt with that issue. And I'm going to close this out with another verse in a second. But let's go on and let's look at the next phase, because the next phase now he's talking about virgins, right? So this is those who have never been married. So understand we have 3 types of people, well 4 that we're talking about. There's widows, there's the unmarried, that if they're not a virgin, then they're unmarried, right? And they're single. So you're either a virgin single, meaning you never married, or you're unmarried, meaning you were married, now you're not. So that's not a widow because that has a term for that. So unmarried must mean divorce. Now, you can argue that 1,000 different ways, and you can go read books and they'll all disagree with this. Common sense says this is how it operates. So he's spoken about those who are married. He's spoken about those who are divorced. He's spoken about those who are widowed. And now he's speaking about those who are virgins who were never married. Now, in this culture, virgins were kind of under the submission of their father. So when we read this, you're going to look like he, this, and that. He's speaking of the father choosing whether he wants his daughter to get married or not. Cultural thing, okay? So let's just read it. I think then that it is good. Verse 25. Now, concerning virgins, I have no command of the Lord. The Lord hasn't addressed this subject either, he says. But I'm offering direction as one who by the mercy of the Lord is trustworthy. Paul's going, look, now the Lord didn't say this. I'm in the Holy Spirit in Paul, moving him to write the scriptures and these letters to the churches. He says, but as one who is under the mercy of the Lord, this is trustworthy. You can trust me on this, he says. I'm speaking for the Lord here. He didn't say it, but you can trust that what I'm giving you is what he would say if he were here. That's how you read verse 25. Then he says, verse 26, I think then that it is good in view of the present distress. Listen, persecution was coming hard here. They're about martyrdom is beginning to happen. People are losing their lives because they've come to Christ. Rome hates Christians. They're persecuting them. And the Jews hate Christians. They're persecuting them. And so he's going, man, in the light of all of this stuff that's going on, it's good for a man to remain as he is. Are you bound to a wife? Don't seek to be released. Are you released from a wife? Hey, don't go looking for one. But if you marry, you have not sinned. And if a virgin marries, she has not sinned. Now, that verse, there's a lot of freedom in that. You can interpret that verse a couple of ways. If you marry, who do you speak to? Those who are in a marriage, those who have been unbound by a marriage, that would be those divorce issues. If you're married or unmarried, virgin or not, you shouldn't marry because of the persecution. But if you marry, you haven't sinned. Now, I don't know if that gives you permission where you are to go, hey, I can remarry. Obviously, there's a lot of cases where, listen, you walked away from a marriage, you did some things, you didn't have biblical grounds, you should either get back with that mate or stay single. Scripture's pretty clear on that. I'm going to leave that up to you to determine what category you fall into. But here is a grace verse right here. But if you marry, you haven't sinned. In other words, if you feel like God has released you from that marriage, not because you have a peace about it. Sometimes that's not from him. That's just we avoided conflict, and that's a false peace. It's not true peace. You determine that. But that verse, if you marry, you have not sinned, is a great, gracious verse that if it fits with you, feel free to remarry. Okay? If you got any more questions about that, you can private message me. I'll be glad to have a conversation with you one-on-one, meet you in person, whatever's going on there to help you with that. But that's all we're going to say about that right now. Now, Then he says this, um, but I say, brothers, the time has been shortened, so that from now on, those who have wives should be as though they had none, and those who weep as though they did not weep, and those who rejoice as though they did not rejoice, and those who use the world as though they did not make full use of it, for the present form of the world is passing away. But I want you to be free from concern. One who's unmarried has all kind of issues. And he says, I'm just trying to spare you from that. The woman who's unmarried and the virgin is concerned about the things of the Lord, that she may be holy both in body and spirit. But the one who is married is concerned about the things of the world, how she may please her husband. I say this to your own benefit, not to put restraint on you, but to promote what is appropriate to secure undistracted devotion to the Lord. But if anyone thinks that he is acting dishonorably toward his virgin, if she is past her youth and it ought to be so, he's saying, listen, you got a daughter and you think, man, she's getting close to childbearing or out of that, I need to get her married. Go just do that. He's given great freedom. He's just sharing his opinion. Then he comes to verse 39. We're going to finish here. A wife is bound as long as her husband lives, but if her husband dies, she's free to be married to whomever she wishes. Only in the Lord. But make sure he's a Christian. But in my opinion, she's happier if she remains as she is, and I think that I also have the Spirit of God on that. Lots of truth we gave to you in a fast, rapid-fire way. Lord bless you guys. I'm way over time here today. Sorry about that. You guys have a great day, and Lord willing, I'll see you tomorrow.